Most disturbing of all, in 1953, an experiment at Porton went horribly wrong when 22-year-old Ronald Maddison died in a poison gas experiment. In part 2, Peter Yorke goes back to Porton Down 50 years after his experiments to uncover the truth about what happened to him. Tragedy struck Porton Down in 1953 when one of the volunteers, Ronald Maddison, died after a poison gas experiment. Porton Down investigated his death in secret and ruled it an accident. Pretty soon, the gas experiments were in full swing again, and the new volunteers were told nothing. One of those new recruits was Peter Yorke. He went to Porton 3 years after Maddison died.
I had no idea. I'd never read it in the newspapers, or nobody had mentioned it down at Porton, that there'd been a fatality, and may have been the very gas chamber I was in. I just don't know.
Just 1 week before Maddison's death, Ken Earl was taking part in the same experiment, in the same gas chamber and the same seat.
He was helped out of the chamber by what turned out to be scientists. I thought they were doctors. And he staggered across the compound, sat down on a bench and collapsed, and he went into spasm. I've seen a copy of his death certificate. It says death due to misadventure as a result of blockage of the bronchi, asphyxia.
They were extraordinarily lucky that there weren't more deaths. How they got into that problem, I would like to know, and I don't know at this stage. But it certainly is something that, in my view, could have been avoided.
Wiltshire police learned of Maddison's death in 1999, after the Ministry of Defence had kept it a secret for almost 50 years. They launched an investigation. Their files are now with the Crown Prosecution Service. Much of Porton's secret history was uncovered at the Public Record Office in London. Here, one author painstakingly pieced together the story of 80 years of chemical warfare experiments on human guinea pigs. It took Rob Evans 5 years to dig through thousands of records and secret files.
They always found it difficult to get enough volunteers for them to carry out experiments on. So they will always be under pressure. They were always under pressure to get volunteers. And the suspicion is always going to be there that they were going to cut corners. Porton were testing nerve gas on an enormous number of people. There was, in 1 year leading up to the death of Maddison, they tested nerve gas on 531 men. And I just don't believe that at that time they were being careful and safe with every single individual.
Ken Earl runs a support group for former volunteers, with almost 1,000 members fighting for recognition from the Ministry of Defence.
We want an apology, and particularly for the Maddison family, for Lilias Craig, that's his sister, and in certain cases, I think, compensation. And most of all, what will bring this will be a public inquiry. That's what we really need.
The solicitors representing the volunteers believe the government is being too hard on them.
As far as I'm concerned, this government's only culpability is the fact that they're not dealing with this matter. It's something they could say, well, it happened many years ago, let's face up to the responsibility of it and compensate the individuals, or at least acknowledge their problems rather than keep denying it. And then, basically, we could all move on.
In terms of compensation and recognition, the buck stops here, at the Ministry of Defence. The Minister with responsibility for Veterans Affairs is Dr. Lewis Mooney. His stance remains a tough one.
We have found no evidence at present to support the contention that there are deaths and ill health linked to the experiments that were carried out in Porton Down.
As far as this minister is concerned, volunteers have no health worries from Porton Down, so there's no case for compensation. And he's denied there's any evidence they were duped with common cold notices.
whoever the gentleman is in the Ministry of Defence says that it was never advertised or whatever, he is a liar. Whoever he is, he probably wasn't born when I read the notice.
What the government has done is allow servicemen to see their experiment records. Last Friday, Peter Yorke travelled to Porton Down from his home in South Wales.
Long time, 46 years. Lots happened.
What are you expecting today?
To be told the truth.
Do you think you'll get the truth?
I'll let you know, perhaps at a later date.
Hello, pleased to meet you. My name's Rick Hall.
Peter Yorke.
Pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I'm going to be your host while you're here. This is Dr. Paul Rice.
Very pleased to meet you, Peter.
And we're going to try to answer some of the questions for you.
Thank you.
We've got a whole series of books inside to show you.
The culture of Porton has changed, and they are a lot more sensitive to the outside world, and they know that people are looking at them, and also they've made such a large amount of documents, released such a large amount of documents that we have a better idea of what went on in the past, and we know what questions to ask.
Also last Friday, Alan and his wife Ira travelled to Porton Down from St David's. Alan, how do you feel about coming back here after all this time?
A little bit nervous. Looking forward to seeing them, hoping that they'll be quite honest with me. And, well, just that we'll have to go from there.
What are you expecting?
I hope they'll show me everything that I did, a little bit more than what they've told me in the letter, and then that I'll be a lot more satisfied.
Many people would ask, why on earth would anyone take part in a poison gas experiment? And I think that's an interesting question. Volunteers went for all sorts of reasons, but the most remarkable thing I found was that a lot of volunteers went because they were sitting around in their units and they were bored, and they went not really knowing what was going to happen to them. But they also went because they trusted in their superiors. They trusted that their superiors would not put them in any harm, and that everything would be all right, that this would be a little jolly.
Two people came at the...
While going through his records, Peter discovers, much to his relief, that the agent which knocked him unconscious was a vomiting agent, not a nerve gas.
From the people involved, from Dr. Hall, I should say absolutely, they've got their records. It was an open book. But, of course, whether those records are complete, we still have our differences. And he admits that there are differences. And he can only be certain of what he's got records for. If some records are missing or never existed, well, that's another matter.
The government has always got a credibility problem, that they can't just rely on the good name of Porton to quash the rumours, the allegations, because Porton doesn't have a good name.
Back at home, Peter reflects on his experiences. He still feels he was conned, but doubts he'll ever see compensation.
I've seen these sort of things in the past. They drag on for years and years until there are no survivors. Then everyone throws their hands in the air and says, well, we're really sorry this happened. You know. It's probably going to be one of those cases.